Welcome everybody here today for our July Plants, Pests, and Pathogens. In some months it feels like, yeah, a month has passed since last time, but I have to say for me this month it feels like, weren't we just doing June last week? But the summer moves on and we're really happy to have everybody here today. I have just a few opening announcements before we're going to turn it over to our guest speaker, Denise Furr, who's going to tell us about snails and slugs. I'll give more of an introduction for her in just a minute. And then we will have our monthly bolos. That is, be on the lookout. These are insects and plant diseases that should likely be showing up in our gardens and landscapes over the next month. And Matt and Mike will be telling us about those. Caroline will close us out with our resource spotlight and our program announcements. So I want everybody to hang on for those. And of course, as always, we are recording and the recording will be available. So a couple of quick announcements. A big shout out to the Extension Master Gardener Volunteer Association of Brunswick County. They have recently made a very generous donation to the North Carolina Extension Master Gardener Endowment. And in fact, this is part of an ongoing practice for them. Since it was founded, the Extension Master Gardener Volunteer Association of Brunswick County has been one of the endowment's most dedicated donors. Their recent gift continues a strong tradition of support and is a testament of their commitment to growing the future of the Extension Master Gardener program across North Carolina. So we are so appreciative and honored to have their support. And we also want to let you know that our next Plants, Pests, and Pathogens in August will be for you to submit your pictures. So we want to see what's happening in your yard and your garden landscape. And this will really put Matt and Mike to the test. I've just uploaded a couple of things myself. I'm very curious to know what's going on. So you can add your photos. We have a Google form where you can upload them with a little bit of information about what you're seeing. Now, to upload those photos, you do have to have a Google account, but those are free, so you can sign up and you can submit your photos using the Google form. We ask all of those are submitted by August 8th to give Matt and Mike time to go through them and get them ready for the webinar, which is always one of our really a fun one of the year when we get to see what's happening around the state. All right, that brings us up to our guest speaker. So we are really pleased to welcome Denise Furr, who is a malacology expert. That's somebody who studies all mollusks, or is it specific to slugs and snails?
All mollusks, but especially slugs and snails.
Slugs and snails, yes. So she is a malacology expert at the Schiele Museum of Natural History, which is located in Gastonia, North Carolina. For many years, Denise's work has focused on snails of the southern Piedmont region, including Gastonia and the surrounding area. Her goal is to provide a more accurate inventory of the region's snails so she may educate people about the benefits of good snails, which is something we're going to learn about today. Especially if we want to have healthy plants in our yards, we need to have those good snails. Denise looks for small differences to distinguish one snail species from another, and these can be as tiny and as subtle as the dullness of the shine on the shell. As we were just talking before we started the webinar. So we thank you for joining us today, Denise, and really look forward to learning more about those good snails and slugs and snails in general. So with that, I'm going to stop sharing my screen and turn it over to you.
Okay. Let's see. I lost my share screen button.
Yes, when we switch between screen share, sometimes that control bar moves. So it may be behind something, or maybe if you click on your Zoom icon, it might open up.
Okay, here I go. All right. How is that? Is that on?
It is.
Can you see my screen?
It looks great. Sure do.
Okay. All right. So my topic today, of course, is snails and slugs in the garden. are they friends or are they foes? And I'm going to introduce you to some snails you may never have seen before and let you know who's eating your garden. So I'm going to jump right in and look at maybe some signs that you may have somebody eating your garden. That could be a snail or a slug. If you're hostas, look like that. Or maybe you've even seen some scenes like this. Or heaven forbid, this one. Yes, you have a problem with snails in your garden, and there's no doubt that these snails are eating your garden. But are all snails bad? Well, we're going to learn a little bit about snails in general, and then talk about good ones and bad ones. Okay, so I'm going to talk about the difference between snails and slugs. A lot of people don't understand why one has a shell and why one doesn't. We're going to talk about facts about snails and their life cycle, so you get a better idea how to control them. And then, how do I recognize invasives? And yes, there are invasives. And the biggest question I always get is, how do I get rid of them? But you may not want to get rid of all of them. So we'll talk about which ones you can get rid of and which ones you really shouldn't. So if you talk about snails and slugs, both of them are mollusks. Mollusks is a huge group of animals. It includes the octopus, the bivalve, the snail, the clams. The seashells you find on the beach are mostly mollusks. But these snails and slugs are members of the group Pulmonata, which means they have a lung, and they breathe air just like you do. So a snail commonly refers to one with a spiral shell on it. We're familiar with these. We have them on our babies, little outfits and everything. We know what a snail is, right? A slug is generally a shellless species of snail. It's still a snail. So slugs are snails, but snails may not necessarily be slugs. And they have evolved in several lineages of snails, so they're not all related. There have been snails in several groups that have lost their shell over time. So they're born without a shell. They don't lose it as they, grow older, or they don't crawl out of it. They're just born that way. So I want to introduce you first to some native North Carolina snails and slugs. Now, I'm not going to dwell on these. There are 260 species, or roughly, of snails and slugs in North Carolina that are they're mostly native, but you rarely see them because they live in the woodland area, mostly under the leaf litter, and some of them are very small. We have them anywhere from this grand globe here that's about 2.5 inches in diameter to these little guys, the little vertigos down here. That picture was taken under a microscope. They're only 1.5 millimeters. So, and a millimeter is the length of Lincoln's nose on a penny. So they're very tiny. But most of our snails that are native are little brown snails. And if you're a birder and you know what a little brown bird is, they're really difficult to ID. And so are our North Carolina native snails. But they live in the woodland area, and they're not likely to be in your garden. But all snails have prolific populations. They lay lots of eggs. Almost all of them are hermaphroditic, which means they have both sexes in one, and some of them can even self-fertilize. They lay hundreds of eggs at a time because as a food organism. They feed a lot of animals like birds and mammals. So a lot of them die from getting eaten. So they have to lay hundreds of eggs, so some survive. The young look just like little adults. You can see here, they start with a little whorl and they add on to the edge of their shell as they grow, getting bigger and until they get to be adult. Almost all native snails, like I said, eat fungi and decaying animals and plants in the woods. You rarely see them in your garden. A few of them do eat other snails. They're carnivorous. Like this one here, the grayfoot lance tooth. It is a carnivorous snail that eats earthworms and other snails. But native plants do not normally eat living plants. So who's eating my garden? Well, you've heard of kudzu being invasive. You've heard of the fire ants for sure. Starlings, the big swarms of birds that came from Europe. Zebra mussels in our rivers. What about snails? We have lots of invasive snails. All these in this picture here are cute, but they're invasive. These phytophagous or plant-eating invasive snails are the ones that are largely responsible for eating your garden plants and your flowers. Some invasive snails are serious agricultural pests. So where do they come from? Well, they're really good hitchhikers and stowaways on people, soil, and plants that you move around. I have to tell a little story about my husband. He drove to Charlotte, stopped to put air in his tire, and on the inside of the rim of his wheel was this little snail that had gone around and round and round and round and round and round and round for 40 miles to Charlotte. And it crawled off and went its own way. So there, I transported a snail 40 miles. So it's not exactly at a snail's pace. They get moved very quickly. Landscape material and bedding plants can harbor snails. Released pets, they make great pets, but if you release them, then it's not a good idea. Aquarium and pond supply. Also, if you buy snails at an aquarium store and then pour them in the river, they're pretty bad for the ecosystem. And some food markets even sell live snails from other countries, believe it or not. So we have laws that prohibit certain things that transport snails. You cannot import snails into the US. If you've ever been out of the country and you're coming back in, you get that customs slip that asks you specifically, do you have any snails? Because it is such a serious problem. You cannot raise invasive snails in North Carolina for escargot or any other reason. You're not supposed to transport soil across state lines. That may be a surprise to some people who go buy potted plants and then bring them back home across the state line. That's actually illegal. And improper commercial shipment of foods and plants. Giant African snails as pets is illegal. And I'll get to that in just a minute. It used to not be, but it is now. And then release of any captive animal into the wild, even if it came from the wild in the first place. So I want to introduce you to some of these invasives that you may not have realized were invasive. They are generally imports from at least the slugs are imports from Europe. And there's very many slugs species. They've been in the United States since the Europeans first arrived. So they're pretty well naturalized all over the country. They're more likely to eat plants, human garbage, and pet food. Yes, pet food. They'll crawl up on your porch and eat your dog's food. Than natives. They eat all kinds of organic material. And they're really an urban pest. This is the leopard slug or giant garden slug. I'm sure everyone is familiar with these. They get up to 6 or 7 inches, and they're not fun to step on in the night when you go out on your porch. They are one of the worst offenders when it comes to eating plants. And they are all over our urban areas. We don't have them out in the rural areas so much, but they're spreading all over. So they prefer living around humans because they get a lot of garbage to eat. And here are some of their close relatives that are just as big a pests. A lot of people have this 3-banded slug in their yard. The dusky Arion slug over here on the right. We identify snails sometimes by their slime color. And this one has bright orange defense slime that it throws off when it feels threatened. So if you pick this one up, you get your hand covered in orange slime. It's pretty distinctive. And then these others are smaller ones that you find sometimes in your flower beds. These are all European invasive slugs. So this is a native slug on the left. Yes, we have native slugs. You rarely see them because they live in the woods. And if you live with the woods around your house, you may see them occasionally. We have some that show up here at our house. And then on the right is the invasive one. And the difference is this little patch up here on its back that looks like a saddle. You don't see it on this one. It's called a mantle. And on this one, it's very, very short. This one looks like it doesn't have one, but it's actually the whole length of the animal. Whoops, sorry about that. It covers the whole animal. And these slugs are usually mottled brown and tan and have little dark spots on them sometimes. There's lots of species of these as well. But that's the difference between our native slugs and invasive slugs. So you don't want to kill the native ones to get rid of the invasive ones. So if you live, especially if you live near the woods where you might possibly have some of these around, you want to be careful how you get rid of the invasive ones. Here's some other snails that are showing up in a lot of places. Hopefully not in North Carolina yet. We are on the lookout for them. We hope they're not here, but North Carolina has escaped these for the most part so far. These are the helix snails. None of these these escargot snails are native to North Carolina or the United States for that matter. So here they are. This is the common garden snail in Europe. This is the Roman snail. It's a little bit bigger than the garden snail. And you can see in Europe, they tend to congregate on trees and fence posts and houses, and they like to be above ground. Our native snails prefer to be under the leaf litter in the woods. So you're not going to see too many of our native ones just hovering around on trees like this. But they're very, very common in Europe. Here's a sepia species. There's several of them. They're hard to tell apart, but they're also have been introduced to the United States, especially in the last 50 years. They can cause crop damage and are spreading across the United States. They are cute little banded snails in different colors. We just found a new population of these just over the North Carolina line in Tennessee that we're concerned about, and we've notified the National Forest Service there, and hopefully they'll be taking care of them. Here is probably the most damaging snail ever. You can see it's huge. This is called the giant African snail. It originated from East Africa, but it is spreading across the world. These were kept as pets in the United States until the 1960s, when they were outlawed and actually collected and destroyed, because they are so bad for our economy if they get into our crops. They can strip trees, they can strip a field. They are really bad news. They can eat at least 500 different types of plants. They even eat the stucco off the houses in Florida. So they're pretty bad news. In 1966, when somebody threw their pet snails out in the backyard, they had to be eradicated, and it cost $300,000 in 1966 to eradicate them. They're rampant all over the Caribbean, so everybody's on the lookout for them here. But of course, recently, the last few months, I have seen that Florida has identified them again in 3 counties, and those counties are under quarantine. So it is really, really hard to keep these out. They can lay up to 900 eggs, and the eggs can hatch over a period of 10 years. So it's next to impossible to eradicate them. And they're self-fertilizing, so it only takes one. This is another one that I see a lot in bedding plants. Now, as far as I know, these little guys are not doing any harm, because they're only about a ½ inch long, and they're really cute. They have bright yellow bodies and transparent shells. But it just shows you how easy these invasive snails are to pass around, because these are in bedding plants a lot. And this one is one I particularly want everyone to look out for. If you live in the eastern part of the state, you may be familiar with this guy. This one is actually native to the United States, but it was only known from the Gulf states, Florida and Texas, until in the last 50 years, it has been moving northward. And in 1980, it showed up in Wilmington. Now it is in Virginia, and it is not a coastal thing. So it is actually moving westward, and we're trying to track its distribution change. So if anyone spots one of these, they're easy to recognize. They have a bullet-shaped shell, which is unusual for a land snail. And if you look at their face, they have these claspers on their face, look like a handlebar mustache. These are the wolves of the snail world. These can chase down, you can imagine a snail chase, other species and eat them. And they are voracious. I have seen them eat a snail bigger than themselves. And they are vicious. They have long, pointy teeth. And yes, snails do have teeth. Most of them are very tiny, but this guy has some pretty good sized ones, and he can rip open another snail pretty easy. So these actually can do some damage on our native snail community. So let me know if you see a wolf snail. To prevent the invasion of these non-native snails, be careful and don't transport live snails or soil to another area. If you pick up snail shells in another area as souvenirs, make sure they're empty. And this may not be as easy as you think. Snails can look dead. They can be way up inside their shell, and they can stay there for a long time. But they may just be sleeping. We call it estivation. And they shut themselves down, depress their metabolism, and they can stay there for weeks until the conditions are right, and then they come out and start crawling around. Learn more about our native snails and recognize the local species. And then we need to report any unusual exotic snails to the Wildlife Resources Commission in Raleigh, or me, and I can, or Matt, and we can get that word back to them. Capture it if you can, because the ID is much easier if you have the snail. So let's talk now about controlling snails in your garden. That's what everybody wants to know, I'm sure. So there is slug and snail bait out there, but I don't recommend slug and snail bait for your garden. And here's why. You notice that on this package, it said attract and destroy in all species of slugs and snails. So you may be killing the native snails that may not have been in your garden in the first place, but this slug bait attracted them. Our native snails are decomposers. They work in your compost pile. They work in the woods to break down the leaf litter. We don't want to kill those. They also, snails are food for birds and small mammals. And if you poison a snail before it dies, it may get eaten by a bird or a small animal. And then you've poisoned other animals that were not your target. It upsets the ecosystem. So I don't recommend slug and snail bait. I've heard that you can put eggshells around your plants. I feed the snails that I raise eggshells. So that's not going to work. I can tell you, they love eggshells. They eat them. It doesn't hurt them to crawl over them. And this diatomaceous earth is supposed to kill insects, and some people say it kills snails. I don't think it has an effect on snails because their slime is so thick, it doesn't penetrate them. It's supposed to be silicone based, that real sharp, that damages their skin. I don't think it works on snails. So there's doubtful effectiveness for any of these products. The most effective solution that I found is chickens. Now, this is not for everybody, but chickens love slugs. And so if you have a big slug infestation, if you could borrow your friend's chickens for a little while, they're great. But not everybody's willing to put up with the chickens. So the next best thing is beer traps. Now, this is super easy to do. Snails are attracted to beer. Now, it's probably the yeast in the beer that they're attracted to, but beer is effective because it's alcohol and it kills them. So you set a trap. This is actually a snail trap that you can buy on Amazon, but you don't really need that. The lid for it is behind the guy's hand up there. It just keeps other animals from getting into it. But you can do it with just a bowl. Just pour some beer in it, and the slugs and snails will be attracted to it. Now, this is also, it can attract the native snails as well. So you only want to use this for a really highly infested area of snails, like Charlotte was talking about with her masses of slugs. But this is very effective. You do have to empty it and refresh it every day, and it's pretty gross, but it works. Another thing that's very effective to get rid of slugs in your garden is to hand pick them. Now, you can pick them up with the tweezers like this person is doing, or you can pick them up with your hands. They don't bite. Some people don't like the feel of them. I understand it's an acquired thing. But then you can select only the invasive species, which are more active at night. So it'd be more effective if you go out there in the dark with a flashlight and look for them. But this is very effective. And I've known people who have almost eradicated their slugs from their yard by going out at night and picking them. And if you keep it up, you will reduce the population greatly. I don't know if you'll ever get rid of them, but you can certainly reduce your population. I prefer dispatching them or killing them by freezing them. That's my preferred method. It seems to be more humane. But if you want to squash them, you know, whatever. I don't recommend putting salt on them, and salt's not good for your garden either. So that's just inhumane to me. But anyway, that is another effective method of getting rid of the slugs and snails in your garden that might be causing damage. And try to relocate those native species, because they're doing you a favor. They're not eating your plants. So I want to share with you a little bit about the research that we're doing at the Schiele Museum. We have a collection, and our collection is used to determine the taxonomy of our native North Carolina species. And over the last 15, 20 years, we have really found a lot of species in North Carolina we didn't even know were here. In Gaston County, we went from 8 recorded species to over 80 since we've been doing this project. We look at the relationship between groups of native snails. We do field collections around the state, including protected lands like state park surveys and national forests. We have just started doing DNA analysis in-house to determine the relationship between these snails. And hopefully this will help determine the conservation status of some of our rare or endangered species, because there are some. We have a huge diversity of species, especially in the mountains and foothills, but then there are unique species also on the coast. So we're looking at all of these to determine what we need to preserve. And our research is showing that species are a lot more variable than we thought and may be susceptible to a warming climate. So this is me. This is my contact information. You're welcome to email me anytime if you happen to be in Gastonia and would like to visit our collections department. Just get in touch with me and we can arrange that. It's not open to the public as a general rule, but we can always give a personal tour. So if you're interested, I would love to share our native snails with you and and tell you about our research. So I'm gonna turn it back to Charlotte and take any questions that you might have.
Absolutely, that was fascinating. And we do have some questions that have been coming in in the chat. So I'm going to go through and call them out. Let's see, we have from Cindy that she used to see snails all the time, but hasn't seen any in several years. Why? Is there any kind of trend in snail populations decreasing, or?
I haven't seen it, but then we don't have a lot of research to base it on. We don't know numbers, and snails are so reclusive that you can't do a population study. So we're still figuring out what's there, not how many. And if it is in your yard, it could be a result of fertilizing or just a temporary trend in your yard. But in the woods, they're still there.
Good. We had Caroline Withers from Hampstead who says she thinks she's seen a rosy wolf snail. And if she sees more, who should she contact? I believe you said she could contact you, but are there other people she should contact?
You can always contact Matt, Matt Bertone. He will be willing to pass that information on to Raleigh, I'm sure. Yeah, there's my email. If you want to contact me, I can take care of it as well.
All right. All right. We have a question. I'm sorry. Was there more?
Yes, if she would email me and let me know where she saw it, I would like to know the geographic area. So yeah, tell her to please email me.
All right. Yeah, I think she said she's in Hampstead, which is Pender County, so the county just above Hanover, Wilmington. Yeah, down at the coast. I used to live there. I actually never saw one. I heard about them, but I never saw one. So, but it sounds like so. And you said they were predators. They eat other snails.
Yes, they eat other snails. They were imported into Hawaii to take care of the giant African snail infestation there. And they took a liking to the native snails instead. And now they have nearly wiped out the Hawaiian snails.
Yikes.
So they can be destructive.
Yeah, it's like the old woman who swallowed the fly. Just kidding.
Yes.
So we have a question too about the difference between native and exotic snails. Is the length of the mantle a distinguishing feature? Is that like, can you say if it's got that shorter mantle, it's typically not native, but if it doesn't have a noticeable mantle, it's native?
Yes, that's the main difference.
That's a good tip.
We only have one snail that might be native, we're not real sure, that has the short mantle. If they're large and they have this short mantle, they are definitely an invasive. They're either an Arion or Lenax, and those are both European invasives.
All right. And for snails with their shells, so when they hatch from eggs, does that snail have its shell already and it just grows as they grow?
Yes. Let's see. Here, you can see that these little baby snails on the back of the other one already have little whorls of a shell. They hatch from eggs with their shells already, if they are snails with shells. If they're a slug, they're just a little blob. It's so funny. They have no color and they're just a little blob. But the ones with shells already have at least one little whorl when they're hatched.
Do they keep that same shell and keep adding to it, or do they shed it and grow a bigger one, or like snakes?
Yes. No, they never shed their shell. You can see on this bigger one, these growth lines. They have They add on to the edge of the shell here, and that's how they get bigger. They just keep adding on to the edge and getting bigger as they grow.
Excellent. So when we find an empty
Yep.
snail shell, that snail has gone on to the great garden in the sky.
Yes, and we don't have hermit crabs on in our area anyway that can take over it. So it's just a calcium source for another snail that might eat it, but other than that, it's gone.
Yes. Let's see. And
that is one thing about our native snails. Our native snails have evolved to live in an acidic environment, which it makes it very difficult to assimilate calcium for their shells. That's why they tend to be a lot thinner and smaller than the ones on the beach. They are also snails, but they can assimilate calcium easier from the seawater. So they need a calcium source, and they are constantly trying to get calcium. That's why I feed mine eggshells.
You mentioned not using salt. That's bad for the soil, and it's cruel. Somebody did ask about Epsom salt. Would that deter snails?
I don't think so.
Yeah,
I honestly don't. I mean, they probably wouldn't crawl through it, but it wouldn't last very long, I don't think, in the environment. And Epsom salts is magnesium.
Yeah, magnesium sulfate.
It's probably not good for your garden either.
it can be, but you can definitely overdo it. So that was my thought as well. I would caution against overdoing Epsom salts. If you know you have a magnesium deficiency, it can be helpful, but otherwise it's not something you want to just do, because it can change the pH. The sulfur in it can lower the pH, and also it can just cause imbalances with other nutrients. We have some questions coming in about how are nurseries able to ship plants across state lines? And I will say all that's regulated through the Departments of Agriculture, and nurseries are inspected.
Absolutely.
So we'll include some links about that in the follow-up resources for the webinar, because Caroline and I were kind of anticipating some questions about that. So we've got some links from both USDA and NCDA that explain those kind of laws about moving plants across state lines.
They have to be certified.
Right. Yes. And they're grown in sterile medium, not soil, like it's actually dug up from the ground. So yes. And let's see. Are there any invasive species that would be found in the western part of the state, specifically Ashe County?
I'm sure that the giant African snail, and I mean, not the giant African snail, the limax, this one, I'm sure it can be found up there. It's found in all urban settings. So in towns, they probably are there. But if you get out into the more wilderness areas, the deep woods, they're not usually in the woods. They're more around houses. So any of these could be in Ashe County as well as, and like I said, we found that population of sapias up on top of a mountain in Tennessee. So you never know.
Just a couple more questions. Somebody asked about putting out a board somewhere where that they would just gather under, kind of like they were doing in the bottom of my pots. Would that be a good way to collect them and dispatch them?
That's a good idea. They are always looking for something dark and moist to get under, and a board would do that. And then you could pick out the invasives and take the natives and throw them in the woods. So that would be a good way to do that.
Yeah. And then we've had a couple of requests to show again that mantle and tips for distinguishing between native and non-native species.
There you go.
All right. And that's the slugs, which are shell-less snails.
Yeah.
And then
And
as
hopefully
Mhm.
other than that little yellow one I was showing you, hopefully we don't have any of the ones with shells on them that are native in North Carolina. Oh, and the wolf snail is in the eastern part of North Carolina, but hopefully we don't have any of the others. We're always on the lookout.
And the native snails and slugs are, you've mentioned a couple of times, they tend to be in the woods, so less likely damaging plants in your garden. But if you have a woodland garden, could some of the slugs and snails you're finding on your plants, eating your plants, be native species?
They may be there, but they won't be eating the plants because
Okay.
they rarely eat living plants. Now, I can get them to eat living plants in a container if I am culturing them. Sometimes I have to do that, but they don't normally eat them, and they probably would not be on your plants unless you're just getting the morning dew.
Right, because you said they're mostly eating algae and decaying things.
Yes.
Okay.
You know, in the woods, the leaf litter takes about 3 years to break down from the time the leaves fall in the fall. It takes 3 years for those last leaves to finally get decomposed. And these are a big part of that decomposition in the forest. They actually have teeth that can break down those leaves. So it's better to preserve them in the forest and let them do their job in the ecosystem.
All right, one last question. So, Victoria says she
Okay.
generally catches them in plastic cups and tosses them into the woods to relocate them. Is that best and is that the best and more humane thing to do for our native ones? Just to put them back in the woods.
Absolutely.
And is there
Yes.
any danger of putting the non-native ones in the woods? Would you be better off?
Hopefully you could. Right now, the biggest part of the invasive snails that we have here in North Carolina are slugs. So just be very careful which of the slugs you have. But all the rest of them, yes, if you just put them in a container and toss them in the woods, that would be the best way to take care of them. It would be like throwing a rare rabbit into the briar patch. They would love it.
All right. Well, I mean, we have had a lot of questions, and this has just been a fascinating topic. We do have a request for you to show your final slide with your contact information again.
Yes.
So I'm sure you're going to get some follow-up questions. But we just really appreciate you taking time to join us today and tell us about slugs and snails. I'm going to look at them in a whole new light now.
Okay.
and look at them much more
Great.
closely.
There we go. Did that come back up? I lost it there for a second.
Yes, you've got it.
Okay,
It's up there.
great.
Thank you.
All right, good. Yes, anybody can email me and I'll be glad to answer any further questions you have. And come to the Schiele Museum and see us sometime. Let me know when you're coming. I'll show you the collections.
That would be
all
fascinating.
Right.
All right, we've got lots of compliments coming in, and thank you again. So I did
thank you all.
I did put your email address in the chat. So I think we are ready to move on now to our bolos. So you're welcome to stay with us, Denise. Or if you need to head off and identify some snails.
And thank you for a great presentation, Denise. I'm really glad to have met you virtually, and I will continue to send you records and interesting gastropods that I find and any other mollusks. Hopefully we don't have any attacks of the land octopus, something like that on our plants. But who knows?
If you do, I want to know.
You'll be the first to know. Thank you very much for being here this morning.
Okay, thank you. Good to see you, Matt.
All right. Well, with that, we have Matt and Mike up next. I'm not sure who's going to go first, but they're going to be telling us about our bolos. Remember, those are the be on the lookout pests and plant diseases. All right, Matt.
Are we doing rock, paper, scissors, Mike, or no? We're
You were listed first on the program, so
okay.
for
Well, I'm ready, so no worries. Let's see. Okay, so it's getting hot out now. It's middle of summer now, and we have lots of activity out there. So here's some things you may be seeing. So cicada killers and cicadas. So I did see right outside of our building a lot of male cicada killers scoping out territories, fighting each other, and trying to secure ground for their mates, who will then be hunting these cicadas. So don't confuse those for murder hornets. That we do have some good comparison. Some good comparison publications online for the giant hornets and these cicada killers, which are harmless, even though they're huge. They are perfectly harmless. In fact, apparently their sting is really mild. Even if they were able to sting you, you'd have to kind of grab them and molest them really badly. So don't do that. Just watch them hunt and know that they'll be gone after a couple weeks and then reemerge next year after they've fed underground on those cicadas that their mothers provide them. Now, lots of caterpillars out there. There are some slug-like caterpillars out there too, as we talked about today, but lots of these large caterpillars are now finalizing feeding, or they're really active and about to finalize feeding. And we often see them coming down from trees high up, and we haven't seen them because they're up there feeding on the leaves, and then they start to crawl down the trees to dig into the ground to pupate. And so you may see some of these giant caterpillars, you know, from 1 inch to the hickory horn devils, for instance, can be several inches long, almost 5 or 6 inches long, one of our largest caterpillar. And of course, with these caterpillars, and most of these are feeding on kind of deciduous plants or broadleaf plants, or sometimes even pines and some of the conifers out there. You can also see a lot of garden caterpillars out there. So gardens are in full swing. You're going to see some of the swallowtails feeding on the dills and parsleys, things like that. Squash vine borers are still out there eating squash in the bases of plants. You'll see a lot of caterpillars on some other plants, including the cabbage white butterflies and some of the other brassican feeding pests. So take a look at those and basically getting a little bit of echo. Oh, maybe not. Okay. Take a look for those. You can hand pick off some of these caterpillars that are larger. You might see hornworms as well. If the hornworms have the little wasp cocoons on them, you might want to pick them off and then leave them on the ground in the garden. That way the wasps can emerge and go mate and attack other caterpillars that are eating your tomatoes and whatnot. Of course, many of the other insects and other arthropods are getting bigger and are attaining the largest size at the end of the year, at the end of the summer. They're out in full swing, feeding and mating and making babies for the next year. A lot of these species have one generation per year. And so, you know, they've fed a lot in the spring and the summer. Now they're ready to keep feeding, but also mate. And they will then typically lay eggs and die. Those eggs will overwinter, and then the young ones will come out in the spring of next year. So you'll start to see these a lot more. Of course, the wasps are much more abundant and active. So the social wasps, like the hornets, the yellow jackets, the paper wasps, their nests are becoming the biggest they're going to get. By the fall, they're going to start producing males and queens that will mate and then go off. Once the colony dies in the fall, the queens will hibernate. But you can also see a lot of solitary wasps. So the spider wasps, this one carrying its prey under it, this paralyzed spider that they'll stuff into a burrow or a mud nest to where the larva will feed. And you may see a lot of these blue-winged red-tail wasps, these Schiele. These are, you know, they're going to be feeding on flowers as adults, but they may be swarming around lawns because they parasitize white grubs, so scarab beetle larvae. So all those Japanese beetles that were out and about and are starting to dwindle, have now mated and laid their eggs in the ground, their larvae will start to grow, and as they grow, these scoliid wasps will attack them in the ground. But they are harmless to humans. All of these hunting wasps, the solitary ones are typically not aggressive, so no worries, and you don't need to be afraid of them. And of course, lots and lots of other arthropod activity. It's too many to mention. This is the active period for a lot of arthropods. In the fall, you're going to start seeing some other things changing over. We'll get to them in August. But look out at the goldenrod, look out near flowers and plants, and you'll see a lot of different arthropods out there. You may be lucky enough to see a mantispid, which is not a mantis, not a fly. It's actually a type of lacewing, predatory lacewing. And here are some bugs on hibiscus. These are a type of scentless plant bug that develop on hibiscus later in the year, especially on the seeds, feeding on the seeds of the plants. So they're not too damaging, but they can be out there and noticeable. And finally, just to be on the lookout for, keep an eye out for spotted lanternflies. Again, they're right now in Forsyth and Guilford County around Kernersville, and perhaps Joro spiders. So you may be seeing them out in the state. Yeah, again, like the garden spiders and the mantises, they have one generation per year. So you don't really see the large spiders until the end of the summer, early fall. So if you're seeing them, let me know, or add your records on the iNaturalist or elsewhere. It'd be interesting to know where they are. And we suspect some people in North Carolina will see them, but we're really not sure what their population is going to be like in the state in the coming years. And with that, I will turn it over to Mike and try to answer any of the questions that are in the chat.
Do you want me to go ahead and start, or do you want to look at your chat and answer live?
Sure. Actually, we got a couple minutes. Maybe I'll answer live. Let's see. So, let's see. So I've been performing surgery on my squash plants to remove borers. What is the success rate of plants surviving? Yeah. So Charlotte says she's never had success. Yeah, it's one of those things that said I've never actually tried. So I'd be curious to what the success is. I think you got to make a really clean cut, and even then, the damage may be done as well. And also, I have seen a lot of squash plants where there are multiple larvae in the base. And so even if you manage to get some out, you may have others hidden in there. So it's a very difficult thing, honestly. I would say, making sure to prevent, scouting for the adults, maybe putting some netting over the plants as they coincide with the adult flights. You can maybe keep the eggs from being laid on the plants and reduce the infestation rate. Are there specific plants we can use to attract the lacewing that you mentioned? So that lacewing is interesting. So that's a mantis fly, a mantispid. They are actually not associated with plants or pests of plants, even though they're related to lacewings. They are actually spider egg parasites or predators. So their larvae actually feed in spider egg sacs and then develop that way. So they are actually not technically beneficial in the garden like typical lacewings, but for green lacewings and the more typical ones that feed on aphids, as long as you have plants around that have aphids and they'll even sometimes the adults will go to flowers and feed on nectar and pollen. There will be lacewings around. And in fact, the larvae are fairly small, but are very commonly found patrolling gardens, feeding opportunistically, mostly on aphids, but on other soft-bodied insects as well. Next question is, where do yellow jacket queens overwinter? Yeah, so social wasps like the paper wasps, the yellow jackets, hornets, in nature, they're going to typically overwinter in leaf litter or under bark, in little crevices, find a nice hibernation spot. And then when the spring comes, they'll wake up and start moving out and creating their own nest until they have enough young to take over the responsibilities. But we do see them also overwintering inside homes. So they will enter homes through the gaps and windows and in eaves and attics. And they will come in the winter, and then you won't see them for a while because they'll be hibernating. And in the spring, you may see them again. So We often see, and I'll definitely mention that in the bolos next month, or at least as we get closer to the cool season, you will start to see an influx in the fall and kind of an exiting of these wasps in homes. And so that's when we usually get the calls about, I'm seeing a lot of paper wasps in my home. It's because they were overwintering there and waking up in the spring. What's the difference between garden spider and Joro spider? They're both orb weavers in the family Araneae. They're both somewhat closely related. Actually, sorry, they're not in the Araneae, although actually it keeps going back and forth with the Joro spider. The Joro spiders are in the Tetranaethidae. They're all these orb weaving large spiders. Functionally, they're very similar. They are not dangerous. Neither of them are dangerous. They're both fairly large and brightly colored. But yeah, actually, if we see real quick, I'll just let's see. So the Joro spider is going to have these black and yellow striped legs and this kind of bluish and yellow striped body that's kind of elongate and almost banana shaped or whatnot. And as you can see, in the black and yellow garden spider, which is a native species, it's got a much more boldly black and yellow abdomen, and the legs are not banded in that black and yellow. We also I should also note that on the coast, we also have the golden silk spider, which is a very close relative of the Joro spider. Looks very similar, except its abdomen is usually kind of more of a brownish yellow with or orangish with kind of rings or spots, and it's got kind of leg tufts on it. So look up golden silk spider. That is a native one, and it is a very close relative of the Joro spider, which is a little bit different looking. And we actually have previous PPP episodes that show the difference. Let's see. I've heard of using a syringe to inject a BT solution in the squash plant to get rid of the caterpillar. I'd be curious about that, but sounds interesting. But with some of these kind of interesting methods, typically if they work well, everybody knows about them. So I would say go for it if you want to, but I'd be curious if it actually works. And then are mantises beneficial or pests? Well, that's all in the eye of the beholder. They're a generalist predator, so they'll eat anything they can feed on, which means if they feed on those caterpillars eating your plants, yay, that's good. If they eat your hummingbirds or things like that, you probably aren't happy about that. So it really depends on what they're eating at the time. Finally, some thread-waisted wasps, I think, have been hanging around my Rudbeckia a lot this season. Well, that's great. Yes, thread-waisted wasps, if that's what they are, typically hunt caterpillars, and they're specialists on caterpillars, which is great, because those caterpillars may often be eating your plants, and they're there at the Rudbeckia to get nectar. So a lot of these asters produce a lot of nectar and pollen and are very good food sources for wasps and bees. So I will move. I'll let Mike take over now, and I'll answer any other questions that come in the chat. But thanks for all the great questions, and get out there and see what's out there, and let me know if you find anything interesting.
Matt, before I let you go, so yeah, my strategy with the squash vine borer this year was nothing. I just let nature take its course, which in the case of the pie pumpkins that I really had high hopes for, they're just kind of slowly declining. But the Pipian squash, which is not susceptible or hardly, is kind of doing well. So it's going to maybe take over that space eventually. But I wanted to ask you though, so what would the timing be on putting some kind of a netting? Because you don't want to exclude the pollinators that are going to pollinate your squash. But when would the flight of those squash vine borer mollusks be?
Yeah, I'd have to look and see. It's kind of late spring, early summer is when they're first going to be out. Let me see. I'll get back and see what I'm seeing online, because every year is different when things are going to emerge, depending. This year we had a fairly cool lead up to the season, so typically insects kind of have a certain amount of degree days before they emerge. So let me look at some data from recently and see if we can find kind of about the time period. But you're right, exactly. You may exclude those things. I would say, if you really have these prize squash, you could probably, and you're really paying attention to them, you could probably inspect the bases of the plants for these small, flat orange eggs. Just inspect the stems, and you can scrape off those eggs, and that'll keep them from hatching in there. If you start to see the moths flying around, I'll send a link of what the moth looks like. It's a really beautiful moth. Unfortunately for squash growers, it's bad, obviously, but I'll send some information, put some links in here. So,
all right, thanks, Matt. Yeah, I also picked off a Manduca off the tomato. Just I think it was yesterday, the day before. So, yeah, even a pathologist kind of would get away from entomology.
Yeah, and luckily those are just kind of eating the foliage. They don't typically cause a lot of harm. Sometimes the other caterpillars feed holes into the tomatoes, which are bad. But yeah, squash vine borer is just it'll destroy the plant. So that's the one people really hate. So okay, well, I'll get some information in the chat.
All right, then let me share my screen. These are 2 hard acts to follow, but we'll try anyway. Hopefully you can see there the slide of disease bolos for late July to late August. And I'm going to start out with the hydrangea, which of course many of us grow, and this time of year, pretty much everywhere in the state, you'll be seeing Cercospora leaf spot, which is a fungal infection, typically small purplish spots that then develop very almost white centers, very pale centers. You also may be seeing the large irregular blotches, kind of uniform brown color, that are the result of heat or drought stress. And of course, the two being very different in their cause. Cercospora, pretty much universal. You may also see some of Corynespora leaf spot, which would be a little bit larger typically without the white centers, but not so large and pale brown and irregular as the drought stress blotches. So 3 things spotting up our leaves of the hydrangea in our gardens as we move into late summer and early fall. Looking up into the trees, just a few things to be on the lookout for will be, now I've seen already the scorch symptoms on the red buds here on campus. Bacterial leaf scorch, of course, being most common on our red oaks, such as pin oak, on our sycamores, but we do see it some on red bud. It's a bacterium that lives within the xylem of the tree. So we know that that redbud tree, for example, on the left, I think I have a picture going back 10 or 12 years of this tree with symptoms. So it's a chronic infection. The original inoculation would have been from insects, from leafhoppers, but then it just stays there. The tree looks good in the spring and early summer, and then starts to get these scorching symptoms as we move into the midsummer and fall, and a tree will look like it has, fall color starting on it when it's really this disease. Very often there's kind of a multicolored pattern along the edge between, or the interface between the green tissue and the necrotic or scorched margins, as you can see in the oak leaf there on the right. Also, especially with oaks, but sometimes on other hardwoods as well, we'll be seeing in these hot days of summer slime flux. That is from an internal condition called wet wood, where bacteria have invaded the wood and are basically fermenting the sap in there, which under the pressure of the gases that are created will force itself out through cracks, for example, or wounds, as this frothy, fermented smelling liquid that attracts some wasps, butterflies, flies, so forth. Beetles too, right, Matt?
Yep.
So you may see them congregating at the slime. The most extreme case of this, and I wasn't there to see it in person, maybe I've mentioned this on PPP before, but so this is one of those kind of stories. Like my wife's sister's daughter's husband. So they were out at their lake place, and he was cutting down some trees last summer, the summer before, and the stump actually hissed. You could hear the hissing, which I would expect would have been from this condition, this wet wood that then leads to the slime flux. With the white oaks, you'll often see the fluxing very low to the ground. Fortunately, though, this is not a harmful condition to the tree. You may have it flux one year and not the next, and there's really no treatment that would be recommended. Please don't, start trying to put taps in there to drain the liquid away. That was maybe recommended many years ago, but right now, really just leave it be. If there's some really loose bark on there, you can remove that, but pretty much just leave it to its own progress, and it should not affect the tree. If you are seeing crown symptoms, or let's say conchs that might indicate wood decay, then that would be another story that would have to be investigated on its own. For some reason, lately, or maybe I've just been more aware of it, we've seen some cases where the fundamental, I avoid saying the root problem, the fundamental problem with a tree or shrub has been these girdling roots. And the picture on the left here, this Indian hawthorn, that just came in yesterday, I think it was, kind of out of a home landscape. And once you got in there, I think Matt's description was best. It's like a pretzel, the way those roots are all wrapped around one another. And of course, this is a condition that's going to start early in the plant's life when a root is growing tangentially to the trunk instead of outward. But it's like a time bomb. It will slowly increase in girth as the main stem of the plant does as well, and they can eventually interfere with one another. So you get things like, well, probably your typical decline, maybe some dieback and so forth. So we had a couple of samples from a large container nursery where this appeared to be the problem too. There was some dieback, for example, on an Amelanchier, but the roots were just a knot down under the bottom. There was also a magnolia there that had a very large girdling root on it. So this is something that you may or may not be able to detect if you kind of move away the mulch, move away the leaf litter, maybe a little bit of soil, you may see them or you may not. The photograph on the right is from a southern magnolia in Mecklenburg County that was submitted in June. And can't say how much of the sort of thinning and decline was caused by this, but certainly one factor could be that girdling root you see marked by the arrow there that is starting to choke off the main stem. And I would add to this poor planting, because if you plant too deeply or you mulch too deeply, that's going to encourage the growth of some of these roots that may be near the surface that are headed the wrong direction. Shifting to the vegetable garden, tomatoes in particular, I thought when Charlotte mentioned the Epsom salts, yeah, my tomatoes are definitely under fertilized at this point. But as far as diseases, some of the things that you'll want to keep an eye out for would be Septoria leaf spot, very common, tends to move up from the lower foliage and up the plant. These are very small spots here in the photo on the left, but they can get larger than this. And one strategy there is just to keep those picked off. You can remove up to a third of the foliage on the plant and still be all right. Southern bacterial wilt, there's no such remedy. That, of course, is in the soil, and the bacterium infects through the roots and gets in the xylem system, the vascular system of the plant, causing the wilting, which may at first be reversible in the cool of the day, but then with time, the plant does not recover. And I think we've talked a little bit in the past on the program about some strategies for dealing with that, which is it's a difficult disease to manage. And another bolo that we still, as of 4 days ago, when Inga Meadows put out her alert, actually, let me go ahead and paste that into the chat here. She put out an alert about tomato late blight and cucurbit downy mildew. And the difference there is, well, there are two different diseases, but another difference is that we have now seen cucurbit downy mildew in the state, not in the western part of the state as far as I know, but we have not seen late blight in North Carolina this year. that I can recall, and certainly not in the western part of the state. So this is the time of year when you would worry about late blight in tomatoes in western North Carolina. Let's see. So here's a link to Inca's most recent bolo about those two diseases. All right. Can't see my own. There we go. This is one that I wanted to include. Oops, sorry. That just came in as an image sample, was submitted yesterday, and the homeowner was correct in the diagnosis of southern blight or Sclerotium ralphii, which is a soil-borne fungus. You can see it causing the wilting here on the delphinium, and then as you look closely at the base of the plant, you see the two signs of the fungus there. The sclerotia, which are the small round pills there that eventually become about the size, shape, and color of a radish seed, and the mycelium there, the second arrow on the right, which on humid days you may see growing up the main stem of the plant as well. So look for, one of the things to look for when you see a wilting herbaceous perennial or vegetables, especially tomato, pepper, potato, would be signs of southern blight, southern stem blight, the fungus Sclerotium ralphii. And let me also paste into the chat a couple of fact sheets about that. This one from the University of Michigan. It has, it's nice because it's got a list of susceptible plants, and that seem to coincide pretty well with some of the ones that we've seen here in North Carolina. And then here is a really extensive publication from Virginia Cooperative Extension about this disease. It's more oriented toward commercial vegetable growers, but there's a lot of good information there as well that that may interest you. All right. And let me just close with, since the bolos were suppressed, I mean, I say suppressed, that sounds like really mean or some kind of premeditated thing. It was just, we ran out of time for bolos last month. And I didn't get to show this, but I was very surprised to see in my neighborhood, in fact, in my yard, in late June, what I am sure were mushrooms of, well, it's now called Des Armillaria tivescens, one of our Armillaria group fungi, wood decay fungus. And usually this is something we see in the fall, September-ish in our area would be typical. So I don't know what in the way the weather was this year caused it to pop out in a couple of different locations. So it's, the longer I do this, the less sure I am of anything I say about phenology or anything else really. Just this will be something to that I would normally put in the bolos next month for like looking into September, but don't rule it out yet. But there are of course things that look like it that aren't. So if all these bolos that Matt and I have presented are not enough for you and you want more, just go to our website and click on the bolos link and the month of interest, and you will have some wonderful summer reading.
Thank you, Mike, and thank you, Matt, for those great bolos and reminders on how to handle some of those things. And now I get the opportunity to do our resource spotlight.
And I'll
So
answer
again,
in the chat. The questions that have come in, I'll answer in the chat while you're doing that.
Thank you, Mike. Excellent. So just a reminder, this is a monthly feature that we do to try and highlight something helpful for you, a resource to add to your Master Gardener volunteer toolbox. And so, as we have been mentioning the past couple months, the Great Southeast Pollinator Census will take place in Georgia, South Carolina, and North Carolina across 2 days in August. It's going to be August 18 and 19. And we've been making you aware of this and encouraging you to plan to be involved. So now this is a statewide volunteer opportunity for Master Gardener volunteers. And what's happening is you're being asked to observe and record pollinators in a garden over the course of an hour. And you can sign up to do this on the EMG intranet. And it's really according to your schedule. You can do this any time of day on the 18th or 19th. But signing up on the intranet would then give you a reminder to that'll help you log your volunteer hours. So you get credit for that participation. So feel free to sign up. But we have a couple of things coming up to help with this. And that's where the resource spotlight lands today. The first is that we're going to have what we're calling a buzz session on July 28th at 1 o'clock. And this is a Zoom call, a casual Zoom call for extension agents and you volunteers to talk a little bit more about the census, catch you up if you haven't been able to listen or attend any of the webinars so far, but really to talk about ideas for participating, whether it's doing it on your own, in your own garden, or getting together with a group of Master Gardener volunteers somewhere and doing this as a group. So we want to share ideas. And we also want to clarify for you how exactly to report your volunteer hours for this opportunity. So please join us if you can for that buzz session. And you can sign up on the EMG intranet to get the Zoom link for that call. All right, secondly, there's going to be a webinar on August 10th. This gets close to the date for the census. This webinar is called Knowledge is Pollinator Power. This is on August 10th at 1 o'clock. And this webinar is open to the public. So anyone, you can feel free to share the news of this for those you know that might be interested in participating in the census. This will review, again, how you can participate and go over some wonderful identification guides that are now available on the website. And there will be a couple of featured speakers. So entomologists, our own Matt Bertone, and also other staff from NC State, Hannah Levinson and Denisha Seth Carley. They're going to help us identify, pollinator plants to look for and insect identification tips. So this is a great chance to really get ready for that day. Again, please feel free to spread the word. Sign up on in the internet again to get the Zoom link. And this webinar will be recorded. So no worries if you can't attend at that time, you can review that later on. So it's getting close and exciting for that event. Okay, we're going to round it out with Master Gardener program announcements for this month. So we have kicked off our new Learn, Grow, Share Showcase series. And these are the webinars we're having that feature local projects by you, by Master Gardener volunteers and extension agents across the state. And it's our goal that you share with one another, learn from one another, and get inspired about things you can do in your area. Coming up later in August, when we will soon have details on the date and time, we are going to have a program on supporting seed libraries. So creating seed libraries and those partnerships. So stay tuned and we'll send you the details when they are confirmed, but just wanted to get that on your radar. All right, coming up very soon is this exciting trip to Vancouver, British Columbia to travel with fellow Master Gardener volunteers. There are a couple of spaces left on this tour while you visit this amazing array of gardens that are listed here. So if you are interested, sign up soon. You can get more information at the link below. And as Mike, no, I think it was Matt, mentioned, please keep an eye out for spotted lanternfly. As you know, the first population was found in Forsyth County in June of 2022, and we are all being encouraged to keep an eye out for it and follow these steps if you see it. Take a photo, report it. Here's the link to report it, to kill it, and look for more. So keep in mind that there are resources for you. Here on my next slide, I've got a list of resources which we've shared with you, but we'll continue to put right in front of you for easy access. Fact sheets in the website, and even a plants, pests, and pathogens recording that we had specifically on spotted lanternfly. So I will send you all those resources in the follow-up email from today, but please keep that in mind. And remember that tree of heaven is an invasive plant that is one of the favorite hosts of spotted lanternfly. Lord knows we have plenty of tree of heaven. And I'm bringing this back to your attention, saving the date for the Western North Carolina Gardening Symposium, which is taking place in October in Flat Rock, North Carolina. But registration happens very soon. It opens up the beginning of August. So if you're interested in that event, which is a symposium that's put together by 5 different counties of Master Gardener volunteers, keep an eye on this website, the Buncombe Master Gardener buncombeMasterGardener.org is the site at which you will find the registration information soon. And that brings us to what we can expect next month, which Charlotte already alluded to, but it's your turn to ask our experts. So one last commercial to submit your photos and get those into Matt and Mike so they can do their research and prepare for us. The deadline is coming up soon so that they have time to prepare. Please get things in by Tuesday, August 8th, and that will get them ready for our August Plants, Pests, and Pathogens taking place on August 22nd. Once again, we thank Denise Furr for being our guest today, and we thank Matt and Mike always for preparing such good information for us. And we wish you happy gardening till next time.
Have a good month.
Thank you, Mike. You too.
Yeah, thanks for attending, everyone. Hope you stay cool out there, but have great plants and insects and all the stuff out there, all the good ones.